Today, we're diving deep into one of the most ambitious social justice policies ever created, India's reservation system. But we're not just looking at what it does. We're looking at its design, its architecture, and we're going to ask a really simple but profound question. What happens when you build a bridge to a better future, but you forget to design an off-ramp?
And right here, this single sentence is the key to our whole conversation today. It just flips the usual debate on its head. The problem, our source argues, isn't that India tried to correct a historic wrong. Of course not. The real crisis is that the correction was never ever designed to end. Was this policy really meant to be permanent? Let's dig in.
To get it, you have to go back to the beginning. The architects of modern India, they weren't just debating some abstract theory. No, they were facing what our source calls a moral emergency, a society totally fractured by centuries of brutal exclusion. This wasn't just politics for them, it was a rescue mission.
And this really shows the fundamental choice they had to make. On one hand, you have formal equality. The idea that you just declare everyone equal, fire a starting gun and say go. But what if some of the runners have been chained up for generations? Well, that's where substantive equality comes in. It says you can't just start the race. You have to actively repair the damage first. And that right there is the principle reservation was built on.
So that brings us to the policy's original blueprint, the corrective bridge. What a perfect metaphor, right? Because a bridge isn't a home. It's not where you're supposed to live forever. It's a temporary structure, built for one reason, to get people from a place of disadvantage to a place of opportunity. And the whole point is, once everyone's across, you don't need the bridge anymore.
And we have to be really clear about this. For decades, that bridge did its job. It was, in many ways, a stunning success. It broke down old barriers, bringing new faces and new voices into universities, into government, into public life. But maybe its biggest success was just changing what was imaginable for millions of people. It proved that these deep historical wounds could be corrected.
Okay, so if the bridge was working so well, what's the problem? Well, the issue wasn't the idea of the bridge. According to our source, the problem was a fatal flaw in the original blueprints. There was some absolutely crucial architecture missing from the very start.
And this lays out those three missing pieces perfectly. First, there was no real plan for a periodic review, to actually check if the bridge was still needed. Second, there was no graduation path, so people could never officially cross the bridge and leave the system behind. And third, no sunset date. No point in the future where everyone agreed to stop and reconsider the whole project. Without these, a temporary solution was pretty much destined to become permanent.
So what happens when a tool that's designed to be temporary has no off-ramp? It doesn't stay a tool. It slowly hardens, it solidifies, until it becomes a permanent platform. And when that happens, the entire purpose of the policy begins to warp.
So let's just lock in this first idea. The bridge was always meant to be a transitional fix, a temporary tool for repair designed with one ultimate goal in mind, to one day become obsolete.
But over time, without an exit, it morphed into this, the platform. It's no longer a temporary tool. Now it's a permanent feature of the state, a whole system that governs by handing out opportunities based on these fixed group identities, forever.
And this shift from a flexible bridge to a rigid platform had these huge, unintended consequences. With no way to graduate, the benefits started to get concentrated within the same families, generation after generation. And individual success no longer meant they could exit the system. And politically, well, the whole topic became untouchable. Identity went from being a social reality to the government's primary sorting mechanism for opportunity.
Which brings us to this central paradox, the real head-scratcher at the heart of this entire analysis. How on earth did a policy whose ultimate goal was a society where your identity didn't determine your fate end up reinforcing those very same identities as essential, permanent categories?
Our source calls this the equality paradox. The whole goal shifted. It stopped being about giving an individual a fair shot to succeed on their own terms. Instead, it became about making sure groups had proportional representation. The very measure of fairness changed from the individual runner's success to the final score between the teams.
And so, this is where we land, with an unfinished correction. The source argues that the real tragedy here isn't one of failure. It's a tragedy of a success that was simply never designed to end.
This timeline just shows the chain reaction perfectly. You start with correction, a necessary, powerful idea. But when you have correction without review, it decays into entitlement. When you have entitlement without graduation, it hardens into inheritance.
And finally, when you have inheritance without a sunset clause, you're left with permanent identity governance. Each missing piece of that original blueprint led directly to the next stage of decay.
And this permanence, it just leads to this profound sense of social exhaustion. You get this dual dissatisfaction. The very people the policy is meant to help feel like progress is way too slow, while everyone outside the system feels permanently locked out. And at the end of the day, our source says this slow erosion of fairness just ends up damaging everyone's faith in the institutions themselves.
We'll leave you with this final, powerful warning from our source. When correction becomes structure, societies governed in two voices rarely remain whole. It's a sobering thought, isn't it, about what happens when a temporary repair becomes a permanent division. Thanks for tuning in.